bomb to somebody who might use it against Israel. You can't get away from that topic of Israel, folks, no matter how hard you try. Okay, when we come back, a couple other little items, and then we'll launch right into the JFK assassination. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington here on the Republic Broadcasting Network at rbnlive.com at 5.050 on shortwave. Well, folks, the latest edition of Forbes magazine has their Forbes 400, the richest people in America. And, you know, it's interesting about that annual listing by Forbes. You know, they have all these nice stories about all these wonderful rich people. I wish they'd give me some of their money, but in any case, it's broken up into the real estate tycoons and the information age tycoons and the people who are into construction and the big money manipulators and so forth. But, you know, it's funny, in the magazine, when they actually have the listing of all the names, they do it alphabetically. Okay, I mean, you open it up here and you find that John Abele, A-B-E-L-E, starting in the A's, he's the 140th richest person in America. Then you find S. Daniel Abraham, who's the 189th richest man, or person, I should say. Let's not be sexist here. And then we have Sheldon Adelson, who's number 3. Well, you know, it's interesting. You probably don't know this. Sheldon Adelson is a big casino and hotel baron. He's worth $20.5 billion. His ex-wife is none other than Barbara Walters, the famous talking head from television. Little gossip there. But in any case, the point is, folks, they have this very long, interesting list. But, you know, they don't list it numerically. In other words, they don't list it from the first richest person to the 400th richest person. And you know why that is, folks? Now, I just have a sneaking suspicion that the reason why they don't list it that way is because it would make it so obvious that there are so many gigantic Zionist fortunes that could be identified if they listed it in the listed it from number 1 to 400. So they list it alphabetically so that you can't see who the richest people really are in the order in which they are rich. If you follow my thinking on that, wouldn't you think that if they were going to list it, they'd list it in the obvious order that would make it most interesting for people and most readily understandable? I think that's very interesting, folks, but I'll tell you what would be even more interesting, to find out who the richest people are from number 401 to 799 or 800. In other words, instead of the Forbes 400, the Forbes 800, because that would be very telling about who really controls the cash in this country. But, you know, it's interesting. You can go to the Forbes website, and they do list it. They do list it in that order. You have a couple sorting ways of doing it at Forbes.com, and you can find it by region, I believe, and by age, and by, I think, even by sex. But not in the magazine. Just a point I've always thought was very, very interesting from the time that I started reading Forbes. Okay, well, the JFK assassination. I mentioned that Paul Tapetti of Poker Face had sent me some information about a young fellow who was at the Irving, Texas rifle range where someone who was supposed to be Lee Harvey Oswald was causing a fuss. Well, fortunately, I found in my computer file the statement by this person. Now, we just have to accept his word as the truth here. I don't know the guy from Adam. I'd like to get in touch with him and chat with him sometime, but I'm going to read it to you because it's very interesting. He writes, I was the little boy at the Irving, Texas rifle range who was threatened by the Oswald lookalike intelligence officer who wanted the adults there to remember a crazy guy who matched Oswald's description. A guy that was shooting if not the Mannlicher Carcano carbine that was documented in the Warren Commission report. He says, I'm not in the Warren report because the retired FBI agent who interviewed me sent his partner out of the room to use the phone and turned ash gray when I told him the guy at the rifle range was 35 or 40 pounds heavier than Oswald and had too much hair to be Oswald, and that every time he stopped shouting obscenities and threats about what he was going to do to me for looking at his rifle that was loaded with really slow powder so it would shoot a loud fireball every time it was fired, he would lean down and whisper, "It's okay, kid, now go on and get out of here." He realized immediately what I only figured out once I got older, that this was a psyop. He was badly shaken up because, this is the FBI man he's talking about, the FBI man was badly shaken up because up until then he probably believed the official story. The FBI took my dad aside and told him to never let me be interviewed about this incident again if he wanted me to live, and told his partner that they had nothing and should go on to the next interview. I was always good at reading people, especially as a kid, and I knew that the crazy guy wasn't going to actually harm me and that it was some kind of game. Take it for what it's worth, folks. I think that's a very interesting story. We have no reason to believe that the story is not true. In fact, it's kind of a story that it doesn't seem like someone would really make up. The guy has not tried to make any money off the story. It's actually a very sophisticated story, which is probably sophisticated in the sense that it's probably true. And it's a kind of a story that you wouldn't really make up. Anyway, that's just my comment on it. But as I say, I thought it was kind of an interesting story. And to the best of my knowledge, it's never been made public. But this time the guy's probably safe because everybody knows now that the JFK assassination was, well, it was a conspiracy and it was a big cover-up. Now, about Lee Harvey Oswald, as I've said, I don't believe he was the assassin. I don't believe he was on the 6th floor of the school book. I think he was outside the school book depository. I don't think he fired a shot. But I'll tell you something, there is a lot of debate and confusion about precisely who Lee Harvey Oswald was working for, who he was manipulated by, whether he was actually working for the CIA when he went to Moscow as a presumed defector, or whether he may have even been working for the Office of Naval Intelligence. There's been a lot of debate about that. There's also some question as to, you know, what Oswald's real political beliefs were. A lot of people say, well, he was actually a hardline anti-communist, that he was, you know, obviously working as a phony defector. But, you know, I'll tell you something. I don't think it's as cut and dried as that. And I'll tell you why I say this, because in this intelligence game, you often find people who play double or triple games. For example, you know, it's very interesting. Oswald's favorite book or TV show, supposedly as a child, was this, I was a communist spy for the FBI or something like this. Story of someone who infiltrated the Communist Party for the FBI. What's very interesting, that same book apparently was also the inspiration for my old friend Roy Edward Bullock. Thought he was my friend. It turned out, of course, he was a longtime undercover operative for the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. But the interesting thing is that I always sensed with Bullock, even after I became aware of the fact, or after I began to suspect that he was a spy for the Anti-Defamation League, which indeed he proved to be, I always had the feeling that perhaps Bullock was actually sympathetic in some ways to the people he was spying upon. This also goes back to the concept of Timothy McVeigh possibly actually being the quote-unquote patriot he's said to have been, the militia type they call him. But he may have thought that he was infiltrating the militia movement, if that is in fact what he was doing, as many people think he was doing. He may have been acting under the idea that he was really helping the militia movement, that he had contacts in the government who were sympathetic to the militia, and this was his way of kind of keeping an eye on things. Now, of course, this is all speculation, folks. But coming back to Lee Harvey Oswald, now, here's what's something very, very interesting. Now, the record clearly shows that if Oswald was the anti-American pro-Soviet defector that we've told he was, that's the official story, Oswald definitely soured on the Soviet Union during his brief stay there. if he ever really was pro-Soviet in the first place. And the truth is, he came back to the United States as an ardent and outspoken critic of the Soviet system. And although he continued, once back in the United States, to proclaim his communist viewpoint, Oswald was not allied with pro-Soviet American communist elements. This is very interesting, folks. Back here in the United States, after returning from the Soviet Union, he was allied with the American Trotskyites, the followers of longtime Soviet leader Joseph Stalin's foremost enemy, Leon Trotsky. And as we know now, the American Trotskyites, the hardcore leadership at the real levels, evolved into the modern-day neoconservatives. I'm asking you, was Lee Harvey Oswald a neoconservative? Now, sounds crazy, doesn't it? But think about it. Because the historical and the political ramifications of this point are immense, particularly for those who say that Oswald was a lone nut in the JFK assassination. Now, of course, the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith has always touted the Warren Commission's claim that Oswald was a lone nut, and also at the same time denouncing conspiracy theories. And not just mine. They have said, the Anti-Defamation League has said that any conspiracy theory about the JFK assassination is dangerous. But see, here's the thing. If Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone gunman, what if he was indeed a sincere Marxist, that he was actually a Trotskyite, and that he was striking out at JFK precisely because JFK was trying to build bridges toward the Soviet Empire? Stay tuned, folks. A little bit more on that when we come back. Think about what I've just said. I'd be curious to hear any comments you would have, but a little bit more on that, and then we'll go to some callers. This is Michael Collins Piper coming to you from Washington on the Republic Broadcasting Network. This is Michael Collins Piper, arriving a little late here. Got a little bit confused, folks. Forgive me for that. I do get confused sometimes. I've been accused of being confused. Okay, well, anyway, before we went to the break, I was talking about what Lee Harvey Oswald's real political views were, and pointed out it's a very good possibility that he may have been under the influence. I mean, he certainly was working with American Trotskyites. And these Trotskyites, of course, were anti-Soviet. A lot of people don't get that distinction. They don't understand that distinction. And it's very important to point out, it's very important to point out that the Trotskyites would have been very concerned about the fact that JFK was trying to build bridges toward the Soviet Empire. Now, a lot of American conservatives, looking back on it, even then, thought that JFK was a traitor because he was trying to build bridges to the Soviet Union, but you have to consider it from another angle, the possibility that the Trotskyites, who wanted to bring down the Soviet system because they were opposed to it, these were Zionist elements, frankly, folks. They would see that if the United States under JFK were working with the Soviets, that would strengthen the Soviet Union. And there were growing elements of anti-Zionism within the Soviet Union at the time JFK was making these moves. And, of course, this was at the same time that JFK was moving against Israel and its nuclear weapons. In fact, JFK himself is known to have told a Soviet leader that there were two groups in the United States that would have problems with him building bridges to the Soviet Union. One of them, he said, were the extreme anti-communists.